Hello, this is Secondary Math 2. Today we are doing notes for section 5.2 through 5.7, Part 2. And we're going to be using two-column proofs to prove triangles are congruent. The congruency theorems that we have worked on so far are side, 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 angle, side, angle, side, angle, 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 side, and that's also referred to as hypotenuse leg. Another theorem that we want to remember is the reflexive theorem, which tells us that angles are congruent to themselves and line segments are congruent to themselves. We're going to learn how to write two-column proofs. Two-column proofs look just like this, in that they have two columns. One has the statement that is given, and the other column tells us the reason for it. So if we look over here, we see that AB is congruent to DE. So we put these little lines here to tell us that those two line segments are congruent to each other. And that information is just given to us. We also know that segment AC is congruent to segment, put the little squirrely thing there, segment DF. And that information is also given to us. We also have a third piece of information in that angle A over here is congruent to angle D. And that information is given. So, with those three pieces of information, what we have is a side that corresponds to this side, corresponding angles, and a second corresponding sides that are congruent, which tells us that these two triangles are congruent based on side, angle, side congruency theorem. The next one, again, we're going to start out with the information that is given to us. First off, we know that angle B is congruent to angle D. And that is given to us right here. We also know that segment AE is bisects, or in other words, cut to right in half segment BD. And that information is given to us. So, when this line AE cuts BD in half, what happens is that makes segment BC congruent to angle DC, because that's the definition of a bisector. So this angle, or this side and this side, are congruent. We also can see that angle ACB is congruent to ECD. And that's because they are vertical angles. And we know that vertical angles are congruent. Now, with that information, we have an angle here, a side here, and an angle here and here. We also know that B and D. There's B and D. So, we're going to use the angle side angle theorem to prove that those two triangles are congruent. We kind of have all this information. Just take the information that we have, put it together, and come up with a conclusion. Okay, on this one, we're going to start out with the information that we have, which they tell us that angle L is congruent to angle N. And that information is given. So we're going to mark that on here. Here's angle L, here's angle N. And we also know that angle LOM is congruent to angle NMO, and that information is also given. So that tells us that LOM is congruent to NMO, and that's why we have these double little bars here. Now, we also can tell that this line is a reflexive property. So that means that segment MO is congruent basically to itself, MO. So, now, what have we got? Well, we've got an angle here, and a side. So we are going to use the angle, side theorem. And there we go. All right, now, this one starts with, and we're always going to want to start with the information that we are given. According to the markings here, angle B is congruent to angle D. So we can write that. Angle B is congruent to angle D. And our reason with the markings there is that's just given. We also know that segment AC is congruent to EC. AC, EC. So, segment AC is congruent to EC. And that's also given to us by the markings. Now, we have a couple of sides here, an angle, a couple of sides here, a couple of angles here. We need another angle. So, we're going to say that these two angles are congruent to each other. Then we have angle, side. So, angle ACB now is congruent to angle ACB to ECD. It's angle ECD. And how do we know that? Because they are vertical angles, and we know that vertical angles are congruent. Okay? So, what have we got now? We've got an angle, side. Angle, side. That's our reasoning. And the triangle is going to be triangle ACB is congruent to triangle ECD. ACB is the same as ECD. Notice that we're starting at the same places. We've got the angle in the middle and then the sides, because the angles and the sides. Okay, now let's try another one. What have we got here? All we've got is sides. We don't have a measure of any angles. So we think we probably want to use side, side. So our punchline here is going to be that triangle ABD is congruent to triangle CBD, and we're going to use side, side. Well, if we're using side, side, we've got to determine which of the sides are corresponding and are congruent. First off, we know that segment AB is congruent to segment CB. And because of these markings, our reasons are that that's given. We also know that AD is congruent to CD. And because of these markings, that is also just given to us. Now, what about the third line? Where's the third line going to come from? It's going to come from this middle one. We're going to say that BD on one triangle is congruent to BD on the other triangle. BD on this triangle is congruent to BD on the second triangle. And we know those are congruent because this line right here is reflexive. So our reasoning for that is reflexive. Okay? All right, one more, and we've got it done. All right, so what we've got here is a couple angles, 35 and 35, 60 and 60, and a 5-centimeter segment in between. So it appears that we want to use angle, side, angle. Sometimes it's easier just to see where we want to end up. Here's the information, here's where we end up, so let's use the information to lead us there. This is triangle RST, which is what they're telling us, is congruent to triangle WXY. Alright, so the first thing we want to say is that angle S is congruent to angle X. Angle X. And how do we know that? It's given to us. They just flat out told us. Then we also know that ST, segment ST, is congruent to what? To XY. Segment XY. And they told us both of those are 5 centimeters, so that information is given to us. And the third piece of information, this tells us that the 35-degree angles are congruent. Now we're going to look at the 60-degree angles, which means that angle T is congruent to angle Y. And they basically just gave us that information. Okay, that's it for proofs, for writing proofs. 2 columns, make sure you have your statements and know what the reasons are for each statement. Start with what you have and then fill in the blanks, and you'll be in good shape. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you learned something.